Alright everyone, I'm starting to feel a little bit like Daniil Dankovsky. I've been working on a video going over some of the core narrative and thematic differences between the Bachelor and Haru specs, and Ice Pick Lodge keeps throwing out FAQs and updates and leaks and things that really add context to those differences. So today, instead of talking about everything I've been working on for the last couple of weeks, I will instead be sharing my thoughts on the role of Psychosis and Apathy in Pathologic 3. Because, oh my god, am I excited. For those of you that don't know, Save and Sound is an online music festival that promotes different games and demos on Steam by showcasing and deep diving their soundtracks. And oh boy did we deep dive the Pathologic 3 soundtrack. We learned a ton of cool things, and one of those things is that Psychosis and Apathy will be something The Bachelor struggles against in Pathologic 3. Back in my trailer analysis, I mentioned that failing to find certain clues or save certain people might lead to quote-unquote penalties that could hinder time travel. When Artemy dies in Pathologic 2, he receives a penalty to his core needs, food, hunger, thirst, but we've already been told the Bachelor will not need to worry about those needs. So what are his penalties, if any? My thoughts, like I said before, were his failures to pick up on clues or solve any of the mysteries of the plague. But now I think we have a much clearer picture on what penalties in Pathologic 3 could look like. In today's video, I want to discuss what we've learned about the role of Psychosis and Apathy in Pathologic 3, how it relates to the Bachelor's character arc as a whole, and how it might function as a penalty. Before I do get into any of this though, I just wanted to put a couple of disclaimers out there. First is I will not be going into everything that IPL talked about in the Save and Sound Festival today. And I really think if you are interested in any of that, which you really should be, they discussed a lot, you should definitely go check out the Pathologic 3 piece of the Save and Sound Festival. I will go ahead and put the link and timestamps in the description below, because like I said, they do go over a lot of really cool stuff, but I just want to focus in on Psychosis and Apathy, specifically Psychosis, and how that might function as a penalty in Pathologic 3. So let's get into it. I've stated this before, but I have not completed Pathologic Classic, and at best I have around 3 hours into the Bachelor's route. So that is a pretty big blind spot for me. That being said, Pathologic 3 is clearly going to play around with the idea of psychosis with Daniil, and I want to look back at the last couple of games to see what we can find. As I stated before, Pathologic Classic is a bit of a blind spot for me. So any piece of direct classic callouts or references to Pathologic Classic are things that I've learned and discussed with my good friend Maikh. She's been integral to me understanding the Bachelor's arc and how Classic relates to Pathologic 2, so I would highly suggest you guys go check out her Twitter while you're here. Moving on, in Classic, Daniil is one of the only adults ever able to really see the polyhedron, a structure inhabited and ran by children, and even then he's only able to see partial bits of it. There's a ton more we could go into with the polyhedron, but for now that is where I'll leave it. I believe Daniil is able to see the polyhedron and even gain access to it because he has this almost childlike dream of defeating death, and there is a bit of almost childlike naivety to that. Yes, Daniil is not a child and is making some really hard adult decisions for the town, but this idea that you can defeat and overcome death is a bit of a childlike one, and the naivety to believe, yes, I will be the one to do it throughout all of history, right? Is a very childlike dream. And so, in my opinion, this is what allows him to see the polyhedron more than the average adult can in the town. So, we've established Daniil, while acting as an adult and being an adult, does have a piece of him that is able to believe things can be accomplished with an almost childlike naivety to him. This is something we've established now. A piece of him that maybe never quite grew up, and this piece of him that allows him to see the polyhedron. This childlike belief in him and this ability to see things through this childlike lens is what I am thinking leads him into the Psychosis and Apathy meter in Pathologic 3. Let's be real, jumping around a timeline the way he does would give anyone a giant migraine and psychosis at a minimum, but I don't think the time travel is what gives Daniil his psychosis. Also, another disclaimer here, I do understand that Daniil will have a Psychosis and Apathy meter, that it's almost like a spectrum, or at least that's what it looks like, but I only saw a psychosis example, or an example of receiving psychosis, in the 6 minutes we got from IPL today and the Save and Sound Music Festival. So I may have missed something. I don't think I did. But if the large part of discussion today seems primarily focused on psychosis, it is because that is really what I'm looking at today. I'm going into this with the understanding that I'm sure apathy will also have its negative outcomes as well, just as too much of any one thing is never good for you. But I want to just kind of focus in on the psychosis piece today. But moving on. I think the primary trigger of Daniil's psychosis will be the destruction and decay of the town as a whole. Seeing his failure and that childlike dream of his dying with the town. It reminds me so much, like I said, of the penalty mechanic in Pathologic 2. The more penalties you take, the easier it is to fail because of these penalties. The one example we see of psychosis in the 6 minutes we got from IPL today is the psychosis penalty. Daniil is shooting at the townspeople and it raises his psychosis through the roof. And you can see that in the audio and visual effects, and because they say that the psychosis is now rising. I think whenever Daniil does things that are out of character of a rational man of science and intellect, we will start to see the psychosis penalties adding up. And I think these penalties will start to snowball similarly to how they could in Pathologic 2. In Pathologic 2, the more you die, the less hunger or thirst you had available to you to fill up, so the harder it was to keep Artemy full and hydrated and energized. So I think the more we see Daniil is shooting citizens, missing clues that lead to death and chaos, potentially even spending more time in the rebellious and infected districts, I think all of these actions and activities will lead to the worsening of his psychosis, which will lead him to make more psychotic actions, or what he would view to be a psychotic action. And this is just a theory because we don't really know what would cause more apathy. At least I didn't see anything in the 6 minutes we got of footage today. But I'm thinking maybe instead of missing clues leading to psychosis, maybe it could be missing clues, diagnosing incorrectly, treating people incorrectly, misattributing a clue to another outcome, things that are failures but not as destructive failures as shooting someone or seeing a district burn down. Maybe those kind of things could lead to apathy, which if Daniil is diagnosing or doing things incorrectly, maybe this could lead to him losing faith in himself, thus having less confidence in the decisions he is making for the town, thus increasing apathy. But back to something a little more concrete based off of what we saw today. You shoot people and it increases psychosis. And I think that is because in some way Daniil has been living in a state of denial. I want to believe that the Bachelor can cure death, and without getting too spoilery, although this is already very spoiler heavy, in some endings I think he almost kind of does that. But realistically his goal is near impossible. He has to know this to some degree, and the powers that be are about to pull the plug on his research, effectively ending his career. There's more than just a little on the line for Dankovsky here. Then he finds out there might just be someone who has the answers he so desperately needs. So he heads out to the town just for the fucker to die and the town to erupt into chaos. He tries to hold it together and rely on his intellect and rationality that realistically got him to this point of his career. But then some surgeon shows up and starts talking to bulls and cutting people open, and people are just listening to him. He begins researching this plague, searching for a vaccine to save what is left of his career and of this town, and every step of the way people are fighting him for it. He's been able to hold this childlike belief, right, that he can defeat death because people recognize in him that he is a smart and rational man. But he comes to this town to have his hopes immediately killed off. Then he spends the next 12 days fighting against the people he is trying to save. Of course, this is a bit of a pessimistic view of the Bachelor's experience. I mean, it does feel like he's fighting against the town, but I think the bottom line is the town does not trust him the way they trust Artemy. His intellect and rationality mean nothing compared to a Maikh of their town. So to summarize this bit, I think that the primary function of the psychosis and apathy meter that we saw will be to function as a penalty. And some of the driving forces, or causes I would say, of these penalties will be failures in various different iterations. These failures could be more destructive, like looting or shooting people, or they could be more apathetic in a sense, where you just miss a clue and you fail, and you see that you fail to prevent a district from getting infected, or something to that effect. I'm not quite sure how apathy would look in this situation, but I do think there is room for it to also have penalty effects, similar to how I think psychosis will. But to move on, one of my favorite themes in Pathologic 2 is Artemis stepping into his role as the leader of the town. And that is putting it lightly. There are about 1 billion themes in Pathologic 2, but I believe one of the main themes of Artemis' journey is learning from his father's actions and stepping into his shoes to fulfill his role as the healer and leader of the town. It's honestly a heartbreaking journey that deals with so many themes surrounding grief, generational trauma, creating your own path, and how deeply your familial and cultural roots can affect you. Although there's magic heavily involved in this game, it is a story that I think everyone can relate to in some form or fashion. While Artemis' story is very much involved with stepping into a role and learning what that looks like for you and learning who you are really in that role, it seems like Daniil's story is the exact opposite. He is a rational man of science who knows who he is at the beginning of the game, knows what his role looks like, knows what he's there to accomplish. But the more he is faced with failure, the more his psyche begins to just honestly break apart. In the Save and Sound Pathologic 3 showcase, some of the footage they show us is of Daniil pointing a gun at a group of citizens and firing after they put their hands up. This is an extraordinarily brutal act. And granted, Daniil is wildly outnumbered here, but after he fires the gun, his psyche appears to explode in a way. Shooting a gun out of panic and fear, feelings that I assume anyone would feel when being that severely outnumbered, even when the citizens are surrendering though, is absolutely not something a quote-unquote rational man of science and intellect would do. Daniil is actively getting put in situations where he is reacting out of emotion, which is further causing this cognitive dissonance between who he knows he is, a rational man of science and intellect, and who he is becoming in this battle against the Sand Plague. Another interesting dynamic between Artemis and Daniil is their approach to death. Artemis seems to accept it as part of life, and while I believe this is because in some ways he is a much more well-adjusted adult than Daniil is, I think part of it has to do with his steppe culture upbringing. There are several pages of the wiki on steppe culture that I need to read, but today is not the day for that. That is not happening today. I am very much just pulling from a character interaction in Pathologic 2. But in Pathologic 2, Aspity asks you to let her investigate Notkin, the first infected. She tells you that she will heal him and she will take care of it. In my second playthrough, when I finally caught up with what was going on, this felt so weird to me since Artemis had just finished discussing with Aspity the idea of him stepping into his father's shoes and taking on more responsibility. What I later discovered is that if you do let Aspity go in to treat Notkin, rather than stepping up and doing it yourself, she ends up dying. And from what I can tell, she knows that she will die when she suggests you let her treat Notkin. She knows, at the least, that her death will spur you into taking more responsibility over the welfare of the people of the town. She accepts her death as a function leading to a greater good. Daniil does not at any point accept death. That is the exact opposite of what he is there to do, and the opposite of his life's work. It's also what makes him extraordinarily special and allows him access to certain things that Artemis does not have access to. I feel like I've been dunking on Dr. Dankovsky for the last little bit here. I'm really not meaning to, but his inability to accept death has led him to great feats, but also may be what leads him to his greatest fall. When I was reflecting about the Bachelor and Artemis and some of the differences between them and why that might lead to the Bachelor having this psychosis and apathy meter, this is just one thing that stuck out to me. It was really the differences in the ideas and relationship with death that Artemis, being someone who grew up in the steppe, might have versus the Bachelor, who is coming from the town and obviously having this thanatology background. Another interesting thing is on the back end of the 12 days of Pathologic 2, Artemis goes to get papers he needs from the Bachelor, who is at Lara's house. We find the Bachelor sitting in a chair looking despondent. There's a corpse in front of him, and we find out in the dialogue with him that he killed this man for wanting to shoot the polyhedron with cannons. The Bachelor laments that he has been accused of murder and looting the entire time and has been innocent of it up to this point. But at some point he has to prove them right, he says. He later says that the polyhedron is the only thing of value in this town and goes on to discuss his lab in the capital with Artemy. This is what looks to be one of the lowest points we see the Bachelor in Pathologic 2, and it's because he's done something so egregious to his role as a doctor and his role as someone who is looking to defeat death. He has killed a man. Every day he's been in this town, someone has accused him of killing and murder and overall chaos, but he has fought to retain his ideals. But when push came to shove, he was willing to kill someone to defend his cure against death. Knowing now that psychosis will be something the Bachelor will struggle against, and that killing people will cause it to further or worsen in this case, this conversation can now be examined in a much different light. Additionally, he says something interesting further into the conversation with Artemy. I can't share the details, we don't have the time. And anyways, you'd have to be me, and live there 2 weeks with my head on your shoulders to notice and realize all that I have. Trust me. Destroying the tower would delay our triumph over death indefinitely. It's really cool because so much of the auditory experience of Pathologic 3 will in fact rely on what's going on in Daniil's head, and here he is in Pathologic 2 saying we would have to spend time in his head. But another thing with this conversation that is important to highlight is that the end of the 12 days is coming. The Bachelor, Haruspex, and I'm sure the Changeling are starting to notice, and the Bachelor is holding on to the one thing he still has. This idea that he can cure death and prove that all of his life's work and research is worth it. All in all, looking back on Pathologic 2 with the understanding that the Bachelor is swinging wildly between psychosis and apathy throughout the 12 days, it honestly makes sense. I'll give him that. I like to give the Bachelor a hard time, but not only is his entire identity and future depending on his ability to cure this plague, but there's this entire step magic and culture that he does not understand in the slightest, and no one seems to want to listen to him. So I imagine at the least it could be a little frustrating, but reflecting on some of his actions and conversations in Pathologic 2 with that background and context is really, really interesting. I started replaying Pathologic 2 a couple of months ago after not really playing it since 2021, and funnily enough, I got through a few days, and then we got the announcements for Pathologic 3, and now it feels like my entire life revolves around Pathologic, which I am so okay with. But as I'm going through Pathologic 2, I'm so excited to view it through not only the lens of Artemy, because I love Artemy, but to really just watch out for Daniil a little more than I have in the past, because he is a really interesting character, and I am very much looking forward to seeing how this balancing act between psychosis and apathy plays out. To be honest, I have always preferred Artemy to any of the other two protagonists. That could very much be because I've only really played Pathologic 2, and I do relate so heavily to his story of finding himself with too large of shoes to fill and way too many people depending on him. That being said, the more I learn about the Bachelor from discussions with Maikh and other Patho community members, and just from IPL themselves, and now Pathologic 2 experiences, the more excited I am for Pathologic 3. There are so many human qualities to the Bachelor, which is really ironic considering he is this larger-than-life character. He's this big-shot doctor from the capital who is literally trying to cure death. But he is also still human, and I think we've all found ourselves in situations at some point or another where our strengths are not recognized by the people around us. As stated before, I've not played Classic, and I'm not nearly as familiar with the Bachelor's story as I am the Haruspex's, but from what I've learned so far and what I've theorized, I am so excited to really get inside his head and see the town on the Gorkon from his point of view. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point in the video, I would really, really appreciate a like, subscribe, and comment. It means a lot to me, and it also helps with the YouTube algorithm quite a bit. I've been a little all over the place with videos. I had a video on the schedule to release a few weeks ago, but unfortunately my apartment was flooded by Hurricane Milton, and I just got settled in my new location, but now I'm sick, so I'm sorry if I said it nasally this entire video, but that's all to say. I am looking forward to at least having more consistent content in the future. I just got my life flooded by a hurricane, but hopefully we're back on schedule now. If you want to come hang out with us over on Twitch, I do primarily stream there, not just Pathologic, but a lot of other games as well. And I also have a Discord where me and, in my opinion, one of the coolest communities on this platform all hang out. So we would love to see you there. Come join us, come hang out with us. But I think that's it. Thank you so much again for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I will see you in the, also, if you disagreed or agreed with me, let me know. That's important too. But I will see you in the next video. Peace.